Good morning, everyone. If you could please take a seat. Hello, everyone. Could you please take a seat? Thank you. Oh, that was quick. Thank you. All right. Again, good morning, everyone, and warm welcome to the stakeholder plenary session. Actions for Near Zero and Resilient Buildings at the inaugural Buildings and Climate Global Forum. I hope that you have had a great few days of exchanges, of inspiration. And in this plenary, we are gathered here to accelerate, to connect, and with the intention of continuing to find the sweet spots on how we can accelerate action towards the goal of the buildings breakthrough of near zero and resilient buildings. That buildings breakthrough that was launched at the UN Climate Summit of COP28. So just yesterday, feels like a long time ago, right? It's been intense, at least for me. Yesterday, we heard from stakeholders across the building value chain, representing all aspects of the built environment sector. It's so rich to be having this exchange in all these sessions and hearing each other out from different perspectives, regions, ways of thinking, knowledge. That is diversity in action, and that is what brings depth and opportunity. After we come, we exchange, we're part of events. So yesterday's schedule was quite packed. There were sessions across multiple topics: energy, finance, materials, methods and construction, the urban environment and skills. All our colleagues discussed the systemic challenges that the sector is facing and the barriers we need to overcome together. But crucially, the opportunity in front of all of us. And that opportunity we have is to deliver a decarbonized and resilient built environment. And at the same time, we can improve nature and biodiversity, social value, health and well-being, bringing a holistic approach to the path ahead of us. And we have, for sure, many solutions to accelerate action and deliver impact at scale. And as we've championed radical collaboration, all of us gathered in this room, wherever you do, whatever you stand in the value chain, we can catalyze that change and go further, faster together. So later on in the day, in the Global Engagement plenary session, we will hear about the excitement announcement of the Declaration de Charlotte and the launch of the Buildings Breakthrough Priority Actions, another step in this collaborative journey towards the decarbonization action we want to achieve together. And also, as we look forward into the future, key moments in the calendar, the UN Climate Summit of COP29 in Baku and COP28 in Belém, it is clear that radical collaboration between all stakeholders is crucial to accelerate action towards our shared goals. So, as they say in the UK, without further ado, in this plenary session, we will hear from experts representing each of those tracks from yesterday, and to highlight the reflections from the many discussions that took place. We will also hear the foremost politician in Europe working to advance buildings, the Member of European Parliament from Ireland, Karen Cuffe, and then we will end the panel led by Thomas Mueller, the CEO of Canada GBC, Green Building Council, which will explore the importance of local action to deliver on the goals of that Declaration de Charlotte. So I would like to welcome the panelists on this first segment of this stakeholder plenary. Please come to the stage, all of you. I'll be saying your name so we save a little bit of time. We have Vincent Minier, VP of Energy Transition Research at Schneider Electric, Johanna Pirinen, Senior Vice President, Sustainability, Stora Enso, Tina Palais, President of RICS, Jure Jada, Program Leader at E3G, and Nasra Nanda, CEO of Kenya Green Building Society. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. Beautiful. That worked really well. So, Vincent.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm good, very good.
How do you feel about representing the energy track this morning?
Well, I feel impressed and I feel
energetic.
Energetic.
Okay.
That's the word. Yesterday was a great day, quite amazing, the number of conversations, the number of topics. Why? Because buildings is really at the nexus of the energy transition. You know, it's about future of mobility, future of heating, everything. So very impressive. And when you look at the energy transition that is coming with both the supply side and the demand side, building will play a paramount role. And in this world, building will not be passive. Building will be smart, ultra efficient, and energy producing buildings. In that direction, all the industry and actors like Schneider Electric are already pushing integrated solution, showing that this is possible to deeply decarbonize and to deeply, I would say, be ready for the future. We shall not put buildings on the market which are not future ready. So from a technology standpoint, it is about ultra-efficient building with passive heating and cooling, with active energy efficiency, with electrified renewable heating, with efficient cooling, and with smart management system. With no digital, no energy transition, because the building will need to adapt to varying renewable and to avoid to put the burden on the grid. So building shall be a contributor of the resilience and the flexibility. And from policy-wise, what does that mean? That means that we need, I would say, modern or modernized buildings and energy codes, both for new build, but also large retrofit. And integrated policies when it comes to subsidies and incentives. One last word is about people. We need people to be on board. We need them to understand. We need them to understand what is sufficiency, why they should pay attention to their energy. We need affordable solutions. And lastly, one very important point. We need people with the right skills to deploy all these technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's the point, right? Buildings are hosting people. That's it. What's it about? There's lives happening in buildings, and great points there around how the sector can also be helping decarbonize the grid, right? But also in a very pragmatic way of making sure that we are all working to decouple the growth of the sector from the use of energy. At the end of the day, it's that's the tipping point to achieve. That's great. Thank you. And now I'm going to go to the materials track. And Johanna, you're representing that track. There's a significant challenge from the decarbonization of materials, production and construction processes, but this is also, we know, in challenges, there's a fantastic opportunity. So in that track, what did you see yesterday? How can those buildings that are major consumers also be a major demand side driver for material decarbonization and unlock to deliver the industry transformation?
Yeah, and
easy.
Easy. No, it's a big challenge, but we can do this.
Okay.
But I am very happy to kind of report back from the materials track, and as you say, it's a great opportunity. So I was already about to pick it from your opening, but now you repeated it. The word that I heard many times yesterday was whole life carbon. It kind of seemed to go through all of the sessions, and of course it kind of brings from the buildings to the materials and the embodied emissions that are locked into the buildings already in the design phase with the material choices. And this is super important because construction of buildings is, well, the materials are accounting for about 10% of the global energy and process-related emissions. So the building materials alone, 10% roughly. So that tells the challenge, but of course then the opportunity for decarbonization too. And of course this materials discussion here has been a great continuity from buildings breakthrough in CAP, and very happy that we now have this forum where all the value chain is coming together. We've been hearing from governments what they are doing on this and enabling it, from leading cities, how they are already kind of guiding the material choices with the whole life carbon limits. And of course, we've been hearing also from industry, we've been hearing about decarbonization efforts of more traditional building materials that are highly polluting. And then we have also heard about ready available solutions that are still currently niche but growing, like bio-based materials, and that session was of course very interesting for me. I understand that I might be a tiny bit biased coming from mass timber company with this one. But much was also discussion about public procurement, how that could unlock the innovation and really utilize low emission building materials and really drive that forward. So, and then also material stream was a little bit talking about digital passports and what can digitalization bring in this and kind of connect back to the buildings level too, that we would really have the insight and then have the circular options. So I think in materials there is a lot of opportunity, as was said, and then this that we need to get this going faster. We need to make those clever choices and choose the low emission materials to get the buildings be suitable for future.
That's amazing, Johanna. Thank you for sharing that agenda of innovation. It seems we're getting to the 21st century, no? Connecting always the data part and the digitalization in every conversation. Methods and construction, Tina. And I'm going to, congratulations on International Women's Day. And thank you, Vincent, for joining us in the panel.
I care about women.
Yeah? All right. Hooray. Yay. Tina, we organized one session yesterday around methods and construction. And can you please expand on the need on the conversation was around creating space for hearing each other out and for the opportunity to have collaboration around how stakeholders, including RACS, can collaborate to overcome the barriers of confusion that there is in the markets right now around the different frameworks, standards, codes, tools. There's a lot of grammar going on there. And then we have whole life carbon and resiliency frameworks and the buildings breakthrough. How can we move forward in facilitating harmonization and alignment? And what do you see from the session yesterday that this amazing stakeholder plenary can take away?
Well, thanks, Christina, and thanks for pointing out one of the main outcomes of our session was that there is a need for a global framework when it comes to meeting our sector's goals, climate goals. But firstly, I really need to say that this topic, global framework, is not about harmonization for the sake of harmonization. It's not, to use some of the terms that came out of our session yesterday, it's not a hegemonic view of society. And the reality is that our sector's efforts to decarbonize need to be measurable, transparent, verified, and trusted in order for all the diverse stakeholders, be it government, businesses, society at large, to work together towards a common goal, and for the sector to attract the capital that it needs to drive the action. So results that are accessible and comparable across projects and countries simplify investment decisions, and accurate benchmarks allow the definition of limits and targets for different asset and project types to inform planning, building, regulations, and other relevant policies. But to paraphrase some of the concerns voiced in our session yesterday, it's not about finding a one-size-fits-all solution. Rather, it's about being able to compare apples to apples. What came out really clearly in our session yesterday was the need to respect local and national differences, geographical and cultural specificities in the whole life carbon assessment methodology being used, as these would be the driver for decarbonization to be taken up in mass and at pace. And I want to stress the in mass and at pace because that's what we need at this stage of the game. So how do we bridge the gap between these local imperatives on the one hand and the need to be able to carry out a global benchmarking measurement to improve and track our process and our progress against these climate goals? It seems like there's a dichotomy there. I think actually something that came out of our session as well, is that we can take a page out of the accountancy playbook, which allows for local GAAP, so generally accepted accounting principles at local level, to continue to be used on the ground, while the outcomes are consolidated under an overarching framework, under a framework such as IFRS. And this is exactly, I think, the vision that we have at RICS to be able to support the built environment to decarbonize using a whole life carbon assessment standard that acts as a global framework. So what is RICS doing about it, you asked me? This standard is a consistent and comprehensive methodology that's developed to assess emissions over the asset's life cycle. And we consulted the entire community, whether that be government, professional organizations, and professionals themselves from around the globe for about 2 years in order to build that particular program. And we also published just recently some guides to complement. And this is where we get to this global harmonization. And I'm almost done. It's using 7 dimensions to bridge local whole life carbon to a global view. And that, I think, is the key, is being able to verify and check and benchmark once against the other. And finally, as no standard is any good without the skills, as you were saying earlier, we've also put together a playbook for skills, and that's something that came out really important in the session as well. We need skills, we need skilled people on the ground to carry these out. And I think I'll just stop with that.
Thank you, and that's amazing, because here we're creating exactly that conversation, that consensus. That declaration is also that consensus way forward, right? And there's nothing without that just transition part of it, that we are really thinking again that this is about people's livelihoods in buildings, having nature thrive with us, not in spite of us, and importantly, create opportunity and jobs across the world to create more fairness and opportunity and equity, right? There's not going to be much if we don't bring people with us and empower them in different ways. So, Jure, thank you for being here, and you have here the task of tell us the finance track. Ooh, they can decide what to invest in, what asset, what to do about it, how can people get access to green mortgage. And there's a lot there to unlock the goals that we share, working to mobilize sustainable finance and accelerate decarbonization at scale. So could you share with us in the conversations from yesterday to brief here our very competent audience, what happened? What is the takeaway of how can we work better together to unlock that opportunity?
Thanks so much, Christina, and good morning. I do have the pleasure, but also the challenge of summarizing so many rich conversations on finance, as have all of the panelists here. And what I want to start with, just as a brief reminder for us all, is that we heard at various points yesterday that currently only 5% of annual global investments in buildings is going to energy efficiency. And according to the IEA, this figure actually needs to be multiplied by 6 to $1.6 trillion by 2050 for us to achieve net zero. So that's really implying a huge mobilization of both private and public finance going forward. And at the same time, I do also want us to remember that, in fact, buildings are at the heart of financial systems because they account for 55% of global wealth. So if we're looking and talking about buildings and finance, we need to consider how to mitigate risk. And inefficient, poorly adapted buildings are going to decrease in value and can also run the risk of being uninsurable. And given that a lot of the losses that we're seeing due to more frequent natural disasters with greater severity are already reaching about $290 billion, this is also a question of systemic financial risk. So with that backdrop, what are some of the reflections and solutions that we came to talk about in the finance track? So I'm going to briefly share 4 main takeaways. And the first one here is that we need to scale up financing for not just green buildings, but actually for green, affordable, and resilient buildings. And that means increasing inclusive finance, but it also means integrating and mainstreaming resilience. It means innovative insurance mechanisms and adaptation frameworks, but it's also about using such tools like blended finance more effectively. So that's the first takeaway. The second is around bringing more people on board. It's about improving the support, the understanding, the awareness, but also the demand for such buildings and projects. And this is really about incentive setting, as we heard about yesterday in the plenary as well, but it's also about behavior change and promoting these decisions. So this could involve tax incentives, it can involve carbon pricing, but generally a more stable, predictable regulatory environment, and clear policy signaling. So there was a panel that mentioned the NDCs that could do this going forward and sending really clear signals in that regard. The third is really about more and better data collection to make information flows better around the performance of these buildings and projects, around their risk and return profiles, their emissions, and this concerns lenders and banks in particular, but it's also about building the better business case for these buildings and for these housing projects. So that was a key theme, and here there was also a call to improve the information access to climate risk assessments, and this is especially concerning for the insurance sector. And I'll conclude with the fourth one, which is really about continuing to promote the role of public finance so that they can better catalyze private finance, de-risk, really also create this demonstration effect and build the profile for innovative projects that bring in more of this, not just the mitigation angle, but also the adaptation and resilience. And I'll end my summary by saying that I was really struck by the many excellent practices and tools and initiatives that are already being deployed and are under development, including different tools for certifying buildings through development banks, but also new and scaling up programs for financing energy efficiency in buildings. And there was an announcement out of the PEEB, the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, which has just scaled up to cover 11 countries, and also 230 million euros financing window, which was announced during the session. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And we're going to bring this together in the urban space and the people that we've mentioned in the panel. And Nasra, you're representing here the urban and skills track, but many more things. But it's a pleasure to have you on this panel. And globally, construction accounts for 7% of total employment and at around 11% of global GDP. And urbanization and construction continues to rise. It is clear that we have to deliver a just transition towards this goal of decarbonized and resilient built environments, but of course we need the right skills to deliver. So from your experience and what you heard yesterday, what are the key takeaways that we can bring forward together as a community to make that happen?
Thank you, Christina, and good morning, everyone. So I'd like to start by saying that at the heart of this conversation, whether we're looking at finance, materials, methods, whatever it may be, it's to work with and for people. And the platform for working with and for people is, of course, in cities and the spaces we occupy. That's the privilege of being part of this industry as the built environment. We are intrinsically linked with dignity. So coming back to yesterday and what I think were the key takeaways, as we think about climate, we can't separate climate from development. And with this in mind, creating the jobs that will empower our people to be prepared for the climate crisis and the development issues that arise as a result means that we need to be first very mindful that preparing our people for this transition means it's a multi-layered effort. So the first thing is we need to work together as governments in a global capacity, regional capacity, national capacity, and subnational capacity, all the way to the neighborhood level. There needs to be governance at all spheres because that micro to macro approach is what will ensure that we are specific enough to ensure that we are applying what's relevant in different spheres and tiers of government, but also broad enough to understand and be flexible to see what's working and what isn't. So that multi-layered governance approach is very, very key. Second, and this is a big one, when we think about empowering our people, we need to be very, very mindful of the geographical context. Now, looking at the Global South, what I often see overlooked, and I'm really happy that our discussions captured it yesterday, is when we're preparing for green jobs and the transition to prepare our people, it's both the formal sector and the informal sector that needs to be green. The informal sector is a huge overlooked opportunity, and especially for Africa, things have been done in the community level. And if we overlook the community level, then essentially, if we take Nairobi alone, you're overlooking 60% of the population. And that means you're already failing. So flip it in the reverse. What does that look like? It looks like green jobs in the context of slums or impoverished communities might not necessarily mean you're creating chief investment officers, but it could be that you're creating waste segregators, waste collectors, waste management at residential levels that are helping the bigger community manage this. And those informal jobs are just critical, if not more, in really getting the buy-in we need to shift the narrative. And I think the other thing which is key, given the context of formal and informal, is that as we think about the transition, we need to look at standards. Without standards, again, in the context of formal and informal, then you will not have the quality that you need to empower communities and businesses in this discussion. And so if we come up with the standards that can empower the green jobs, then what you will bring in is the E, the S, and the G. When I talk about the E, I'm talking about what does the environmental perspective of these, green job look like in the context of that particular market. But also, when you're looking at the social aspect, you need to make sure that your workers are having safety and health issues considered as they're working in their different contexts. And of course, the governance component. The government cannot be excluded in regulating these different players to ensure that we are transitioning in a way that is structured, but with people in mind. And then I think the last takeaway is it'll require a lot of capacity building, and that will require finance. But now what this does is it creates purpose for finance as we design and build the buildings, formal or informal settlements, and the cities we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazra. So beautifully put. It's around also purpose with dignity. And it doesn't mean that if you have lower income, you don't deserve quality infrastructure, and that we can bring that conversation of efficiency and quality down to the community level and not be exclusive of the E, the S, and the G. We are up of time, so I'm going to thank you, and we're going to continue on. It was an amazing summary. Please join me in thanking them for their contributions. Now I would like to welcome Kjarenkov, please, to join me on stage. He's the MEP from Dublin, from Ireland, and a member of the Greens. We can pick.
Pick a chair.
Pick a chair. A member of the Greens EFA political group. Welcome so much, Karen. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Excellent. So, for those that you don't know him, he is a qualified architect, not only a politician. And he's a green champion, which is amazing. It seems green buildings have been part of your DNA for a very long time.
They have. I remember 10, 15 years ago finding out about the Living Buildings Institute in the Pacific Northwest and being intrigued that you could think about not just the energy used in a building, but the embodied carbon, the water, and then even think about protecting biodiversity. A very ambitious standard. I think it's the Living Futures Institute now. But look, over the years, I've come across LEED, BREEAM, Energy Star, all these different levels at a European level. But the great thing is that at a European level, there is a commitment to move forward with higher standards for not just new buildings, but also for existing buildings. And the recast Energy Performance of Buildings Directive is going to be a very ambitious piece of legislation, aimed, the North Star is net zero by 2050, but we have achievable targets for energy reduction for 2030, 2033, and so on.
So I was told yesterday that that table in the Energy Performance Buildings Directive with targets, it's worth billions for the sector because it would mean that there's certainty, that enabling policy environment that was talked about in the last panel, right? That they would bring that. And there's a key final parliamentary vote taking place next week. But it'll be all right. You've made it all right several times already. In terms of the lessons learned in this journey, it was smooth to get here, but global policymakers want to legislate. They want to help decarbonize buildings. From that journey, what do you think has been the key enabler in getting to where the EPBD is right now?
I think looking at the future of buildings through different lenses, economic, social, and environmental. I come at this from a very strong environmental background, but it's really important to point out that there is huge social benefits if we reduce the amount of energy that's needed in buildings, because we know that tens of millions of Europeans are living in energy poverty. They cannot afford, and 2 years ago they saw that in the winter, they simply could not afford to heat their homes. And if we improve those homes, it creates not just the green jobs that we talk about, but it creates real benefits for some of the most vulnerable in society. So I think ensuring that we tick both the economic, the environmental, and the social. And then I want to come back to the point that Nanda Nazra made. You don't solve this just at a European level. You need the global initiatives, but you have to come all the way down to the micro. What are you doing in your neighborhood? What is local government doing? What is regional government doing? And if you can get all of these different layers talking about decarbonization, talking about a greener future, then I think you can achieve a lot.
And do you, in the exchange with your constituencies, you've been a champion of this, but I was hearing also here the Marjolaine from the chair of the French GBC. When she's championing this, she's having an exchange and representing what constituencies are wanting from improvements in how they live, their communities. In your own work, that is also how you do it, like with your own constituencies, and you build up. You represent that social aspect, but is there an engagement of that dialogue to be able to bring the communities with us, empowering the movement?
There is, and I think you have to recognize what level people are at. For a huge amount of people, for most of you in this room, the people you know, they simply want housing. They want decent housing. All the rest is an add-on. The energy performance, the embodied carbon. For so many people, they simply want a roof over their head. So we need to bring people on a journey, and that involves a lot of communication, of making that link between the kind of crises we're seeing on our screens of extreme temperatures and wildfires, and then the action that can be taken with our buildings. And reinforcing the fact that buildings consume 40% of Europe's energy and are responsible for 36% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And I always try and make that connection. If we tackle buildings, we're well on our way to tackling the climate crisis, but also delivering in other areas as well.
In the evolution of the EPBD, the Energy Performance Buildings Directive in Europe and the European Commission, there was also an evolution from energy targets to emissions targets, right? There's also been that journey. How do you see that level of also at the MEP level of understanding that shift?
I think a lot has changed over the last 5 years. And I think the invasion of Ukraine by Russia focused people on energy, but also the European Green Deal from the get-go was about an inclusive umbrella, a suite of legislative measures that would tackle emissions. But then the energy crisis, the energy price spikes, made us think about energy. And it allowed us to talk about both targets together. So now we can freely say, yes, this is about tackling the climate crisis, but it's also about improving energy sovereignty. You know, we made up posters, my political group made up posters. If we insulate homes, we isolate Putin. And it was a really clear message, because we've been so dependent on oil and gas from Russia. And I think in all of these discussions, the discussion about energy efficiency has to be highlighted, because the discussions that go on about where will we get our future energy seem to dominate, and the initiatives to reduce the amount of energy that's needed rarely hit the headlines.
Exactly. And yeah, and sometimes when we're in the conversations with the energy sector, the conversation is around expansion, renewables, consumption. And we are part of the solution of doing less with more, reduction of energy demand. And yeah, but energy efficiency, sometimes it has been overlooked so many years, no? It's like a little Cinderella that sounds like, no, we need to dance with her more.
It's true.
It's International Women's Day, Cinderella.
That's true, and I've been lucky enough to work with some extraordinary women on getting this legislation to where we're at. And I think actually there is a gender lens is an important one when we look at the future of buildings, because women are spending a lot of time at home, and the improvement of buildings, I think, will disproportionately impact on women. So starting with buildings is a good start. It really is.
Totally, exactly. With information, you can get empowered and you can act, right? And so it goes directly also if you that's how energy efficiency codes come about. Ideally, you make more space for homes who have more money to invest in education and other things. It doesn't have to be too wasteful energy.
No, it's true. It's true. And I think something we learned through the pandemic was the huge importance of healthy, warm homes, because a lot of us spent a lot of time at home, and there was a real disparity between those with the luxury of large homes and large gardens and those living in small apartments. So it brought home the importance of improving our buildings, starting with the worst performing buildings, and that's something that we've put front and center in the legislation that will hopefully come through next week. And the kind of conversations we've just had about financing, about information, we're talking about one-stop shops within the legislation. That's really important, that people get simple, clear advice on what they should do, because there's a lot of confusion, particularly about these new technologies, about heat pumps, about solar panels, and you turn on the radio and you've all these ads telling you this is exactly what you need. So having impartial advice, I think, is really important, and we've good examples of one-stop shops in the Basque Country, in Ireland, in other parts of Europe. So the directive highlights the need to increase the amount of one-stop shops. You touched on finance as well. That is crucial. But the message I got, and I've conducted a huge amount of webinars over the last few years, was give us clarity in the legislation, we will deliver the money that is required. And that was coming from the European Central Bank, the European Investment Bank, from so many different agencies. So finance, information, and then of course the skills issue, and I think there's good work being done on that, and we need to obviously do more.
Amazing. And so lastly, at World GBC, we talk a lot about the role of green building councils. There's 80 of them around the world, connecting ambition to action, we say. We need to connect that ambition to action. So the final remarks to this audience today, if I may ask you here, what can they do to make the policy ambition you champion a reality?
I think we have to start these conversations. I think while my role has been to work on introducing the international requirements in Europe, I think the local conversations are so important. And the local initiatives on sustainable, renewable energy communities are a way of getting neighbours to talk to each other. So I think working with your neighbours and with those close to you in making making change happen is important. And then having the conversations with the decision makers. And sometimes those are political decision makers, sometimes they are institutional, sometimes they're corporate, sometimes they're different organizations. But there is an appetite for this. Yeah. Whenever you do the polling, the vast majority of people want to see this happen. They just need the tools to move on from where they are. So clear information, good training, I think will set us on the right road. And look, it's a bit like eating an elephant. It's an enormous task, but if you go at it in bite-sized chunks, you can deliver the goods. And that's why we have targets for 2030 and 2033. We're not going to do everything overnight, but if we have a roadmap for where we want to be, and if we have milestones along the way as to what we can achieve, then I think people can relate to that and they can think about what they can do next.
Thank you so much. I hope you got that sense of momentum and inspiration, and really grateful for your leadership and for your time with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's welcome him. Okay, so thank you so much. Excellent insights, and now I'm looking forward to hearing the implementation next week. That will pass. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Thomas Mueller. He is the CEO of Canada GPC for the next session. He's going to be here. I'm passing it on around multi-level action to strengthen the Declaration de Charlotte after a short, here we're just changing the stage, please, if we are or we're not.
Thank you, Christina.
Maybe I have the wrong notes, but it's over to you.
It's over to me.
You
Thank you. You did a great job. Good morning, everyone. I'm Thomas Mueller. I'm from what we call the Great White North. It's not as white anymore, and it's not as cold anymore, but it's still great. So we have a great panel ahead of us talking about action and multi-level action. So I'm going to ask the four panelists to come up. So we have Jyoti Hosagaraha from the World Heritage Center at UNESCO. We have Kamal Adaji from Lome in Togo, mayor. We have Elizabeth Chege from Kenya, Sea for All. And we have Judy Zakreski from the International Codes Council. Welcome. So let's get started. So many questions and so little time. So we better get this. On the road. So Jyoti, I was quite excited that you're one of the panel speakers, because yesterday we talked a lot about technology. We talked about sustainable finance. We talked about capacity building. But there's also another aspect to it. Let me talk about World Heritage, of course. We also talk about natural areas of global significance, cultural heritage. We talk about indigenous communities, indigenous knowledge, which we all know are really important as part of the equation. We also know our cities will grow to a great degree over the next decades, and they will put pressure on natural areas. And we need our natural areas. We need our habitat. We need natural areas for sequestration of carbon. And how do you see in your role how to balance sustainable urban development with these pressures that are being put on the natural environment from cities, but also from resource extraction? Big question, I know.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for this panel and for this question. I'm really excited to be here. I think what is, first of all, very critical is really to quote what Carl Oliphant, the president of the American Institute of Architects, said, which is the greenest building is the one that's already built. So what I want to emphasize is it's not just about protecting natural heritage and natural ecosystems, which of course we are very committed to, but it's also about the built heritage and where that's coming from and how that's taken care of. And I think that's the kind of more integrated approach that UNESCO would absolutely advocate for. And I would say in maybe 4, 5 different ways that I could talk about it. First is by looking at international agreements such as the World Heritage Convention, which you're all familiar with, which is looking at both natural and cultural heritage, looking also at cultural landscapes, which are the outcomes of both the interaction of people with the environment. So it is this idea of local knowledge and the ways of managing ecosystems, of being able to have traditional knowledge of extraction, which is very fundamental. The second is, and so in addition to the World Heritage Convention, you have other international agreements, such as the 2011 recommendation on the historic urban landscape. Now, this is very critical because it is, and this has been adopted by 195 states parties, which is about being able to have urban development processes, integrating heritage conservation into urban development plans and processes, so that they're not seen as two distinct activities, but really as in an integrated way. And that in a framework of sustainable development and climate resilience. So this becomes another very important way. And the third is the Mondial Cult Declaration, which was adopted by 150 ministers of culture, committed to reducing the carbon footprint of the culture sector. Now, all of this together, of course, then we work on policies, documents that, guidance, that provides guidance that is agreed upon, sort of global guidance. What kind of guidance are we talking about? So just to give you an example, we have adopted, the member states have adopted the policy document on climate change, climate action for World Heritage. And one of the points, it's talking really about looking at retrofitting, looking at how to manage the negative impacts and to look at mitigation so that there is minimal carbon footprint. The emphasis is on using traditional building materials and technologies, using local resources, so that again, building on the knowledge of indigenous communities. The approach in all of this is to engage with local communities. It is their heritage, and what we're doing is essentially supporting them in managing their heritage. So that really enables them to value their heritage enough to be able to have new construction that actually is in line with all of their, existing buildings, and this gives a larger context, so that it's not just about preserving monuments, but really about the entire ecosystem that supports it, including the traditional water systems or the traditional building techniques and the extraction systems. All of these are part of it. And I invite you to consult the UNESCO Urban Heritage Atlas, which has been recently launched, which looks at how to identify these attributes. I invite you also to look at the World Heritage Canopy platform, where we have case studies that provide you examples of how you can have heritage-based solutions to sustainable development and climate resilience. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. I think there was a really good perspective. I can tell you in Canada, reconciliation with our indigenous communities is part of the solution to climate change and how we manage our natural environments. And our communities has become a very important part of the agenda. So it's good that we obviously cities is where the action is, clearly, but we know that the natural environment in smaller communities are also very important in climate change. And I know that you have to leave. You have to go to another event,
My apologies to everyone and to the panelists, but unfortunately I have a commitment and I have to leave.
Well, thank you very much for being here this morning and sharing your wisdoms and your insights. I want to go next to Kamal, and we know that. Oh, it's okay. I can look at that. Thank you, Kamal. We know that at the local level, at city level, is we know that's where the action will be. Cities will see massive change. You're the mayor of a large city. What do you think? What can cities do? What mechanisms are available to cities specifically to support and encourage the transition towards like whole life carbon, resiliency, and why also at the same time having a just transition as well?
Thank you, Thomas. If you allow me, I will go in French. We can be in France and without speaking French. So please allow me to do that. So thank you, Thomas. Merci beaucoup. C'est un plaisir d'être avec vous ce matin pour parler de la question de la décarbonisation et de la transition écologique des villes. Je commencerai plutôt par faire un état des lieux de la situation d'un point de vue, d'une perspective d'un maire d'un pays africain, d'un petit pays africain, le Togo. Aujourd'hui, notre priorité sur le continent et dans beaucoup d'endroits du monde, c'est plutôt de comment offrir un logement abordable aux populations. Il s'agit plutôt de pouvoir proposer un logement de qualité, abordable et efficient aux populations. Nous avons un problème de villes qui ne cesse de croître, avec des banlieues qui deviennent de plus en plus grands chaque jour. Et cela a accumulé un problème des zones rurales de populations qui viennent de l'intérieur du pays vers essentiellement la capitale pour pouvoir trouver une vie meilleure. Cela pose beaucoup un problème de sous-logement. Mais au-delà de ça, c'est aussi une priorité, c'est aussi une chance et c'est aussi une opportunité parce que ici en Europe, il s'agit plutôt de réadapter les bâtiments qui existent à un système de décarbonisation. Mais sur le continent africain, comme nous avons encore beaucoup de choses à faire, profitons de l'occasion pour pouvoir mettre en place des normes qui permettent d'avoir ces bâtiments qui nous propulsent déjà sur ce plan de transition écologique. Donc le débat est permanent. Mais proposer un logement de qualité écologique, à quel coût? Parce que tout est question de coût. Il y a une question de priorité. Nous devons pouvoir, nous avons beaucoup de priorités, comme je le disais dans un autre panel hier, notamment la sécurité, l'éducation, la santé. Est-ce que pour nous, l'essentiel aujourd'hui, c'est la transition écologique? Toutes ces questions se posent. Maintenant, quelle est la solution? C'est peut-être d'encourager l'innovation. Et c'est ce que nous faisons aujourd'hui à travers les écoles d'architecture, les jeunes urbanistes que nous avons, c'est d'encourager l'innovation parce que si nous arrivons à proposer des matériaux de construction de qualité à coût abordable, nous sommes sûrs que les populations iront vers là. Et quand ils vont vers là, cela remplit aussi nos objectifs de pouvoir proposer des logements de qualité qui respectent les normes écologiques aujourd'hui. Mais au-delà de ça, on a dit ici dans cette salle que le débat est tellement large qu'il faudrait que cela soit structuré autour de plusieurs acteurs. Nous avons les acteurs internationaux, nous avons le gouvernement national et aujourd'hui, je suis content que les autorités locales aussi soient fortement impliquées là-dedans. Mais il faut que ça soit structuré. Il faut que ça soit structuré et il faut que cela tienne compte de l'objectif de tout le monde. J'allais dire tout à l'heure qu'ici, en Europe, par exemple, même si nous n'avons pas les mêmes problèmes, comme je le disais, mais l'objectif reste commun. Et dans cet objectif commun, chacun doit pouvoir définir sa part de solution pour qu'on atteigne l'objectif de préservation de notre planète commune. Mais le centre du débat se concentre au niveau des collectivités locales, au niveau des villes, puisque les populations y vivent et c'est là le maximum d'émissions carbone est produit. Donc il faut que le débat soit vraiment structuré autour des villes et autour des autorités locales. Merci.
Thank you so much, Kamal. It's interesting when I listen to you, the similarities of some of the challenges that you described that we also face in cities here, in cities in North America. Again, in Canada, we need 5.8 million units of housing by 2030, and we don't know how to get there to house our people and the people that come into Canada and immigration countries. So there's a lot to share among cities, I think, what the action will look like, and that ranges, of course, from education to retrofitting existing buildings, and the new construction is going to happen inevitably across the globe at a very massive scale. And that brings us, and you mentioned it too, Kamal, it brings us to standards. So Judy, you are in that space of, you're with the International Code Council, and you really represent the standards and codes perspective today. It's always like yesterday too, I mean, it's always considered to be a key strategy to develop codes, standards to guide the industry to do better, much better. But really the stringency and the pace of code development really varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction greatly, even within countries, from cities to provinces and so on, depending on your government model, of course. Is it possible, which I heard yesterday a few times, is it possible or realistic to expect that countries around the world should use a single set of codes and standards to achieve and enforce the things that we really care about, whole life carbon and resiliency?
I could keep it really short and say no, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to expand on that a little bit because I think that a code or a standard is only as good as its implementation and enforcement. And so there are plenty of model codes and standards out there, but for a jurisdiction to effectively use them, they have to be right-sized, they have to be enforceable, they have to consider the availability of materials. As Kamal said, you know, it could be a chicken and egg discussion. Are you going to have a higher standard of materials for construction to encourage the suppliers of those materials to sell in your jurisdiction, or are you going to wait until those materials are available and then require their use? So I think, you know, ultimately in every jurisdiction, it's going to be a bit of a consideration of what comes first and what's enforceable. Again, if whatever code or standard is used is not enforceable, the impact is limited at best. You know, there are some benefits from voluntary standards, but the most widespread impact from high standards comes from standards that are enforceable. And that requires capacity building. And the capacity building is something that is often used to refer to training, and training is an essential part of capacity building, but the capacity building needs to go beyond training. It needs to go beyond it needs to go to building an ecosystem that enables the enforcement. You know, having jurisdictional authority to review plans and to raise revenue. By doing that sort of plan review, to inspect buildings and ensuring that there's competence both in the practitioner arena as well as in the regulators and the authorities having jurisdiction. Now, even though there's not a one-size-fits-all code or standard, that doesn't mean that we can't aim for harmonization and alignment, because that is achievable. We don't need to be reinventing the wheel in every country, in every city, in every jurisdiction. But there are challenges. The information needs to be easier to find. And it needs to go beyond ISO and IEC, which are great organizations for creating standards, but there are many standards used throughout the world that are not ISO and IEC standards that might be more appropriate for a given jurisdiction. But that information's not, there's no single clearinghouse for all codes, all standards. And so that's maybe something we should be working towards. The other challenge that we've heard about is having a common language and taxonomy. You know, that's something that sort of transcends the specifics of codes and standards. We can be using a single language to be talking about these things. But the alignment and harmonization, there are so many benefits. They're avoiding duplication of work. They're promoting trade and reducing trade barriers. And if you'll indulge me, I'd just like to make one comment about resilience.
Please go ahead, because yesterday was a lot of discussion around codes and standards, as we all know.
There was, yeah.
There was a fair amount, so please go on. We have a little bit more time. Please go ahead. Yeah.
I just need to speak a bit about resilience and adaptation, because you know, I think that's really critical for emerging economies, for the marginalized communities, and resilience and adaptation are half of the the goal of the buildings breakthrough. It's nearly net zero buildings and resilient buildings. And so I think a lot of the discussion gets focused on energy efficiency and green buildings, which is important and it's critical, and I'm glad we're having those discussions, but I don't want resilience and adaptation to get lost in the discussion. We need to be, moving beyond lip service and having an equal focus on the need for resilience and adaptation. It speaks to the just transition. It speaks to the loss and damage. So I'd like to encourage all of us as we move forward beyond this week to be considering how resilience and adaptation and energy efficiency and net zero are not mutually exclusive, they're complementary. And as my friend Marianne Armstrong from the National Research Council in Canada says, adapting does not mean that we're failing to mitigate. We need both, and adaptation is an urgent need that speaks heavily to particularly marginalized communities and emerging economies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. It was excellent. Yeah, it's clear that we need to increasingly think about adaptation at the same time as we're mitigating. And with that, and you also mentioned, with the codes, what I find is that we still have to do training and upskilling and capacity building, but we also have to still build a lot of understanding what action actually means on the ground. And we sometimes forget that we still have a lot of work ahead of us to get the larger population engaged around solution around climate change and resiliency. But I want to go to our last panelist today, to Elizabeth. Again, we heard a lot yesterday about carbon literacy. That literacy, we need to build that up. There was a lot of discussion around skill development, capacity building particularly. We don't nearly have enough people in the industry to help us achieve the goals that we have set ourselves, both internationally and nationally, around decarbonization of buildings and cities. So it's very critical that we build that capacity. From your perspective, Elizabeth, what would you say would be some essential approaches to build that capacity? What would be some of the critical aspects of and investments that we need to make to build capacity to upskill in the industry to get the results that we are looking for?
Thank you very much for having me here, and happy International Women's Day as well. I think one of the things we need to look at, and from all these conversations, is the risk of business as usual. I hear a lot of the same things I had at COP, yet the reports are showing that this sector is not doing exactly what we need to be doing. So even with the element around capacity building and upskilling, what are we upskilling for? There is a lot of data and numbers that were shared in the last few sessions yesterday. We know we are heading not in the right direction, honestly. With the SDG goals themselves, we're not on track to actually meet them. So as a sector, we really need to think about, do we need to turn this over? And on the women's side, they've been left behind. They're 50% of the population. Whether we talk about global north or south, we're talking about all of us bringing in youth skills development and bringing in the women on board, especially in the construction sector, in the energy sector. So talking about action at Sustainable Energy for All, we have youth and women STEM training. And the challenge around that is actually getting sponsors, supporters. Not all the organizations have the aspect of capacity building or upskilling, but they can support the organizations that are already doing that. In the same case with the Green Building Councils, one of the key mandates is education and awareness. With that education and awareness, we need all of you to be part of your Green Building Councils. And if you don't have a Green Building Council, set one up and actually be part of this upskilling. The second part of this is, I don't think we learned enough from the pandemic. There was a lot of opportunity in using technology during the pandemic for upskilling. We had a lot of webinars. It was a bit slow in the beginning, but at the end there was a lot. But at the same time, if we expect to fly young people from Africa to other countries, to other universities, to spend 4 to 6 years, 2030 is around the corner. We're talking about NDC updates in the next 2 years, for example. Do our policy makers know what they need to do? They need upskilling. And from one of the roundtables we had yesterday with some policymakers, we saw we actually need to start now. We need to have started already. So when you talk about investments, we do say yes, 100% of the investments need to go towards climate action, but a higher percentage of the climate action element, if we talk about energy efficiency or resilience or adaptation, is for people to understand what that is in the first place. And I think the sector has been fumbling a lot, and the numbers show it. So let's be realistic, let's work together, let's collaborate and say, yes, we have an issue at hand. We need to learn from each other. South-to-South learning has really worked well as well. So from Kenya to Ghana to India, there's solutions happening in different ways, and through adaptation, through the finance that's already there and investment, through the adaptation of skills, indigenous knowledge. So if we can also learn from each other and not just rely on the structure of capacity building and skills that we've had so far, because that is business as usual. We need to work on business unusual, even with capacity building, skills upgrading, and also the South-to-South learning that I've mentioned. Thank you.
Fantastic, Elizabeth. I think we need to put capacity building and skills development at the same level as we put technology development. Because essentially, we have the technology now to build low-carbon, zero-carbon buildings. We have it now. It's the application of those technologies and the scaling of it. And I think the training, skill development, as you said, across countries, across the population, getting young people involved, getting indigenous communities involved, to bring it back to our first guest, a panelist this morning, are critical in getting us there. So thank you all. Please give a hand to all the panelists. Thank you, very good discussion.
And if you can just stay here for a second while we wrap up the session, just
Yes,
because we're a little bit over time.
Christina's back. Just one thing, just to say,
Yes.
in terms of International Women's Day, we have gender parity on our board, and 2/3 of our employees are women. So that you know, there you go.
There you go. Amazing. I hope all of you here today have learned something new from attending this fantastic session we had today. We had such diversity of knowledge, and that is so important. Gender diversity and parity is important, but also the knowledge, the perspectives, the richness. I'm excited to see how all the different organizations, governments of all levels, private businesses, civil society, all represented here should have an appetite from all stakeholders to collaborate on shared goals. This is really what comes through the energy of the session and of the stakeholder plenary. So it's now the opportunity that we take it into our hands and we build on the deliverables of the Buildings Breakthrough, work with governments, private sector, NGOs, work together so these goals are met, and we change the trajectories. What's the next day? The next day is what we make out of it. It's in our hands. So there's a lot to do, of course, but working together, we can accelerate that vision towards net zero emissions and resilient buildings, the reality. Thank you so much for joining us, being here so present and such a lovely audience, and for clapping like 10 times for International Women's Day. Highly appreciated. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.